G'day everyone, welcome back to the Wixie 500 YouTube channel. In this video I want to show you how to build a Ferrari, or at least how I built this one. This is a 43rd scale white metal kit from Tameo. It's Nigel Mansell's Brazilian Grand Prix winning Ferrari from 1989. I'll take you all the way through from preparing the parts, putting it together, painting, decaling, the whole deal, and also a change I made to this to improve one area of the car that led to some issues further down in the build. So stick around, I'll show you all about it. This is what you get in the little box from Italy. I won't go through all of the bits and pieces here because I have already done an unboxing video for this model, so I'll put a link to that at the end of this video. You can build either the Nigel Mansell or Gerhard Berger version of this car, and it's the early season version, specifically the Brazilian Grand Prix with the low air box. Now I should clarify, this is the first version of this kit, number TMK89. Tameo has subsequently released a completely new tooling for this car and makes for a far better and more accurate model. So if you were looking at building the F189 Ferrari, I'd suggest finding the newer kit rather than this one. But having said that, this old kit still builds up to be a nice car. And this is the real car. Nigel Mansell in Brazil in what I think is a really nice looking Formula One car. Now, it's the first F1 racer to ever have a semi-automatic gearbox with the electro-hydraulic shifts via the paddle behind the steering wheel, and Tameo include a little photo etch part for those paddles, which is pretty cool. Now this, as I said earlier, is the low airbox version. After a few races into the season, Ferrari then went to a higher airbox version, which ran the rest of the year, and Tameo does have a kit for that as well. These are the two main castings that make up the kit, the top body and the floor tray, and they get held together by this self-tapping screw which comes as part of the kit. But what you do have to do first is drill this stub in the top body to line up with the hole here. And when the two parts come together, the screw sits down flush with the bottom of the floor. Now these raised blocks with the wording in them, they mean that the model sits a little bit high off the ground when it sits on these blocks. And so I ended up grinding these down a little bit. But you can also see here, this is before I've done any other cleanup, we've got moulding seam lines along the sides and some flash around the back here, as well as moulding excess material from the gate they use when they create the mould. So there's a bit of cleanup involved, but not hard because it's quite soft material. And this is, again, before I do any cleanup, there's a bit of surface oxidization which needs to come off, and also again the casting where the gate where the hot metal flows in when they do the moulding, that all has to be filed down and the nose of the car reprofiled. Now the blocks that were under the car, I decided that I wanted to lower it a little bit to give it a more realistic ride height. So I just ran the model backwards and forwards on some sandpaper and ground those blocks down a little bit. And it gave a ride height like this, so brings the car much closer to the ground. And in real life, these cars basically almost ran on the road. They ran them really low to get the floor to work, and also a little bit of rake included in this, a little bit higher at the rear than what it is at the front. So really happy with this ride height. And while this moves the model to be a little bit more realistic in one area, it did present some issues later on in the build, which I'll talk about when I get to them. And these are those blocks after the rubbing on the sandpaper. Once I got the what I would hope would be a nice ride height, I then attached the floor to an MDF base that I just painted grey, and this is to mount the model for display purposes, as well as having something to hold on to when building the model, because building these 43rd scale kits is a bit of a pain, so attaching it to a base just makes it easier to handle. Now when putting this onto a base, you've got to sort of rule up and line up where it needs to fit, and to get it in the center, and also where the screws are going to go through. So there's a self-tapping screw here at the rear which just goes into this empty cavity where the engine would normally be. This is a curbside model, no engine detail in it. And the front one, however, had to be careful that it didn't firstly go into the cockpit area, which would have been visible when looking in from the top of the model, and also that it cleared the lower wishbone photo etch. So this is the front screw just coming up and making attachment into the floor. Then it was on to preparing the cast pieces. So this is the rear diffuser, which like a few things in the model was cast a little bit thick, and so I just gently filed it down to make it a little thinner. So this is just the right hand side here, filing it down and cleaning up the edges of the molding. And this is just a comparison, that right hand side being thinned down, both the floor as well as the side of the gearbox casing, and this left hand side is how it was cast from the factory. Decided to do the same thing on the hot air outlet at the rear of the car. So this left hand side is just filed down a little bit to make it a little, or appear a little bit thinner, and again the right hand side is as it come from the factory. And this is just the rear outlets from underneath the model, showing the taper, just to give the illusion of thinner bodywork at the back of the model. The model then gets secured to the base to then do a bit of a mock-up build. There's lots of individual photo etch parts that have to be cut off and filed, and in some cases bent. So some of this rear suspension, for example, has to be bent up to fit. And also the locating holes for some of the suspension arms and the push rods and that sort of thing, they need to be drilled out to allow room for the arms to go in, as well as take into account the thickness of the paint when the paint goes on afterwards. So working on assembling the rear here, the rear axle goes through the body and basically acts as the datum for getting all of this together, and it's a nice solid rear end on this particular model. Then moving on to the front, you can see here I've shaped the nose by getting rid of that casting lug, and the front uprights, and these here are the front brake ducting that goes onto the upright, but they're still connected to their sprue here, and there's some flash in there that needs to be removed. And this is just building the uprights. It's two parts, the basically brake disc and upright, and the cooling duct, and this is when it comes together, just using some super glue to attach these. Probably could have put a bit of filler or something on this just to make it a little bit smoother, but this is painted semi-gloss black, and it's not overly visible when it's assembled. And the hole here is just a locating hole for the steering arm. These are the wheels being built up. Now they're turned brass, so there's two halves to each rim, and then there's a spoke insert and then a wheel nut. And these are all photo etched that have to be cut out of their fret and cleaned up. Further progress on the unpainted fit out. Just making sure everything lines up. So this is ready for those top suspension arms to sort of fit, to make sure that they fit in their relevant holes and that the holes are big enough. And same deal for the rear wing. It's over here, not assembled. The side plates and a lower element have to all fit into that as well. Then it's on to getting some paint down. So using Tameo LP5 on the rims and the uprights. And these are the tyres that come in the kit. Now they are rubber tyres, a hard rubber. But they've also got, I don't know if you can see it in the video, but there's a fine line, looks like a split just as part of the moulding of the tyre. Each tyre had that, and also an injection point for the rubber. So when putting this together, it's just important to just clean this up a little bit and basically put these to the bottom so that they're not so visible. This is trimming down the front wing element. So on the left is the front wing after I've trimmed the trailing edge, and the one on the right here you can see is much thicker, which is how it come from Tameo. And this is the back of each of the front wings, again my thinned down modified version, and how it came from Tameo. So then once all the main parts have been test fitted and adjusted, it's time to pull it all apart again and clean and wash all of the pieces ready for primer. You can see here the rear wing has been assembled now, so the brass and the photo etch going onto the gearbox, and the mounting and the main element was all one piece white metal. Then all the parts got a quick shot of Tameo fine grey primer, and again I'm just using the alligator clips to hold most of the pieces. And the body then got thin coat of pink primer, simply because it's a red model and the red is more vibrant over a pink primer than what you get when you put it over a grey primer. Then it's onto the colour, and just using the Tameo TS8 Italian red for the main body, and also the mirrors down here, and everything else being done in semi-gloss black. I was using the TS29 decanted out of the can and put through the airbrush for all of the other parts. Now the seat is a separate metal piece that gets glued into the cockpit which is part of the base plate, actually, the cockpit sides. And this seat was hand brushed just using a mix of buff and flat earth Tameo acrylic colours. I can't remember the XF numbers, but it was buff and flat earth, I remember that. And then it was time to put the decals on and get some clear over it. So I clear coated this in Tameo TS13, just run through the airbrush. And what you're seeing here is how it came out of the airbrush. There's no polishing at this particular point. The decals, though, I thought were a little bit big. This Ajip one on the side here should not be getting up into the body gap for the top cover, and the Ferrari logo and so on is just all a little bit too big, in my opinion. Or either that, or you could look at it, the model's a little bit too small for the decals. But I just thought there was a little bit of a sizing issue there when you look at photographs of the real car. I did consider trimming the Ajip down a little, but then I thought, no, that's going to start making it look a little odd. So I just went with the kit decals as they were. And this is again just as it come out of the booth after the clear. Now, I didn't go and polish much of this model. I did not in this photo, but afterwards I did go through and do very light polishing of the top surfaces that didn't have any decals, so the side pods and the top of the engine cover here. Just very light polishing with some Tameo compound, because I was a little bit worried about the decals. The kit's 30 years old, and I did have a bit of issue trying to get them to stick down. It was as if the adhesive was not as strong in those days, or the adhesive had gone off a little bit, but just wasn't really happy with the way the decals stuck down. So once the clear was over it, I didn't want to go polishing any of the clear over the decals, just in case it lifted the decoration off the model. But as I said, I did go back later and do the top surfaces a little. Then it was time to get on to the tyre decals, but the thing is, the lettering is a little bit too big, and also the incorrect radius to match the tyre. You'll see here, particularly with the Eagle logo, it's too flat. It should have a tighter radius curve to fit the sidewall of the tyre. Now with these, I did put a little bit of gloss clear on the sidewall, let that dry, and then put the decals on top of that, just so that they have a bit more grab on a smooth surface rather than the rubber. And while the Eagle was too flat, the Speedline decals from the rim, they were too curved. So a little bit of calculation errors there from Tameo, or Cartograph, I think it was, that did these decals. And once the decals had dried on the tyres, I then flat cleared over them to help seal the decals on, and also give that flat rubber-like look to the sidewalls once again. Now the kit does include decals for the branding on the seat belts, but didn't include any belts. All right, so I just made up some belts out of just plain paper, cut it up at about 1.5 millimeters wide, painted it black and folded it and glued it in place to replicate how seat belts would look sitting in the cockpit, and then put the Ericsson's decals on the belts afterwards. Before putting the top half and the bottom half back together again, need to paint the insides of the cockpit. So that's just been done by hand with some semi-gloss black, and also on the top of the cockpit here, and the headrest, and also the engine intake, which was not done very well there, and the outlets from the radiator ducting as well. The rear suspension has to be put in place to put these two halves together, and then they're screwed together for the final time, basically. Wheels are done in the background and ready to go on. You might see there's a bit of paint chipped out here because this is at the stage ready to put the front suspension in, but the holes here had filled up a little bit too much with paint, and I had to sort of drill them out finally to get the paint, but the paint chipped, so I had to come back afterwards and touch that up by hand. Now remember how I lowered the ride height by grinding the raised blocks underneath the floor? Well, that presented a problem, because by lowering the car, the axles are lower and therefore closer to the plinth, and there wasn't enough room to get the wheels on. So what I did is on the face where the injection moulding of the rubber goes in, I just carefully shaved off a very thin amount of rubber, basically flat spotted the tyre, and then put that to the bottom just so that the wheel would fit in over the axle. And then at the front, because of the low ride height, the front wings, when fitted in their normal position, ended up being not able to be fitted horizontally flat. So I've had to work on the the mounting tab here a little bit, and also on the end plates so that the wing can go in and keep it nice and flat and horizontal. So a bit of work involved there. This is just dry fitting it all, getting the fit okay. Then it's time to get the front suspension and the wheels, etc. on. So just using CA glue to attach these to the bottom A-arms, which basically provide the support and strength to the front suspension. The last bit on the front suspension is just putting these steering arms in. And you can see here that there's quite a bit of an angle upwards, because I sort of bent the suspension up a little bit to get the axles a little higher so that the front wheels would fit in. In hindsight, maybe I should have just flat spotted the bottom of the front tyres like I did with the rears to make this not so aggressive on an angle. But anyway, that's how I've done it on this one. And then once the front wings were painted and deckled and cleared, and I just used gloss clear with a dab of flat in it just to take a little bit of the shine off. The front wings just then get glued into position, and these pieces of card are simply there to hold them up in place while the glue dries. The windscreen is a vac form clear plastic piece, and I've just given that a few light coats of clear smoke just to tint it. And then you have to carefully cut around the edges and trial and error. Cut it, see if it fits, cut it a bit more, see if it fits, and try not to cut too much away because you can't put it back in. So it's quite fiddly to get this the right size and to then glue it into the cockpit. But once it's in, the model is basically done. Unique shape to this car, very unique for the time, but as I said earlier, one of my favourite Formula 1 cars. With the flat spotted bottoms of the rear tyres, it actually gave the model a really look of like there's the high downforce really stuck to the ground look, so I was quite happy with that. I thought it turned out quite well. And getting that windscreen in, you see here, maybe should have trimmed it a little further, but I was worried about trimming it too hard and then having it too small, so maybe I should have gone a little bit further that, but from a distance it looks fine. Also, the kit is so old, Marlboro, all right, that's an original decal that come with the kit, it's not aftermarket. This is the rear of the model, and I just used Tameo gunmetal on the gearbox casing and a little bit of red for the rain light. The oil cooler is simply a photo etch part that's folded up and glued in place. Now the kit does also include some photo etch struts that connect the wing to the floor just as support brackets, but in real life it didn't have brackets as such, it had cables and they were quite thin, and in photos you can barely see them, so I didn't worry about putting the brackets in because I thought it was a little bit of overkill. As I was saying before, once the tyre sidewalls were, the decals were dry, I gave them a coat of flat clear, and then I put the tyres onto the rims. But the thing is, pushing them onto the rim meant the rubber distorted a little bit and started to break up the clear, and where the decals were fixed down with the paint surface underneath, and started getting this ghosting effect, which was not ideal. So in retrospect, what I should have done was to fit the tyres to the rims, then did all the decaling, and then masked the rim off before I sprayed it with flat clear afterwards. And then this is the 43rd scale Tameo build that I've just completed with its bigger cousin, the very same car, but the Tameo 1/20th scale plastic kit, which I built probably, I don't know, 25, pushing 30 years ago now, way before I'd heard of things like primer and clear coat. And you can see here the white decals, and again these are original kit decals. They're very, very yellowed now. And these photos don't really do justice of the differences in the two reds. Both models were painted with exactly the same paint, the Tameo TS8 Italian red, but the new build is TS8 over a pink primer and then clear coated afterwards, whereas the Tameo was just the TS8 was sprayed straight onto the body. There was no primer at all, and there's no clear coat over the top, and underneath the inside of the body has just been brush painted with semi-gloss black just to make the body less translucent. But this photo does not show the difference between the two reds when you're looking at it in real life. So there you go. I hope you've enjoyed the build and learnt from my lessons in the event that you ever build this model for yourself. Don't forget to check out the website, wixie500.com, also on Facebook and Instagram, and there's some further links in the description for other projects that I've been working on subsequent to this particular build. Anyway, until next time, cheers.